in philosophical terms, a society-wide lockdowns and subsequent vaccine mandates put significant restrictions on the individual in order to collectively protect the most vulnerable, right?
So I'm actually going to stop this because I'm going to reset this up as well. So from watching this, you'll get there's two kinds of people, right, when it comes to the lockdowns. They're the kinds of people who wanted to have their lattes and haircuts free and easy, and they're the kinds of people who didn't want people to die, even though it wasn't them. It was the vulnerable people that Jack's talking about. And I'm sorry, but I think you can only be in those two camps. You either wanted the world to be open so you get your lattes and haircuts, or you accepted, as much as you hated it, for parts of the world to be locked down for a period to save people's lives. I don't see how you can be in either both of those camps or another camp. They're the only two camps you can be in. The world open, or for a time, portions of the world closed, right? And I think what you're going to find with this is Lord Sumption, if you think of it that he's one of those, I want my lattes and haircuts, what he says makes more sense. Because when he starts talking about it and Jack comes back to him talking about deaths, he kind of hand waves it away. Oh, blah, 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 blah. So think about it like that. Even if I'm wrong, correct me if I'm wrong, people in the chat, but if there's two kinds of people who want their haircuts and lattes, no matter what, or people who want people not to die, have those in your head, and we keep hearing this conversation. Jack's just talked about the lockdowns helping to protect the vulnerable.
That's essentially...
Right.
That was what we were
Could have been done without lockdowns.
How so?
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, because, I mean, first of all, the problem that most countries faced was that they went from an early stage down a coercion route. And once you do that...
True. A coercion route. That's what we did. We went down a coercion route. No one's going to disagree with that. But he's saying, unfortunately, we did that. Okay, we'll keep listening.
And once you do that, it's necessarily going to be indiscriminate. You can't have a law that says we have a different rule for people over 65 to people under 65.
Here's the first stupid thing he says, right? And I'll show you the quote word for word later on. But he says, you can't have a different role or rule, I couldn't quite hear what it was depending on his accent, for people over 65 to people under 65. It's too difficult to enforce. Now that's idiocy. Because Chewy, when are you allowed to start drinking? When are you allowed to start driving? Who gets the pension? In America, who can be president? You know, you have to be at school by the time you're 6 or be in. We have rules and laws all over the place, where there are different rules for people over an age and under an age. And he's sitting there saying, you can't have that. It's too hard to enforce. Now, unless he's an absolute kind of libertarian purist and thinks all drugs should be regulated, there should be no limits to, then it's a fair point, but I don't think it is. I think he's making a stupid argument to back up a point that he's making that's full of holes. Now, before I keep going, Chewy, do you want to add anything?
No, please let him keep digging.
Okay, well, here we go.
Route. And once you do that, it's necessarily going to be indiscriminate. You can't have a law that says we have a different rule for people over 65 to people under 65.
Like the pension, for
too
example.
difficult to enforce.
Exactly over 65.
Using persuasion is a lot more sensitive to the different requirements of each type of person. And it works. We know this because the one country that defied the worldwide trend and did something different was Sweden. They had no lockdown, they didn't close schools, they didn't close restaurants or other places, they only closed major venues
this point's
like
about to be
sports
made.
stadiums. And their results were roughly comparable to the European average.
So there's the Northern Hemisphere bias. The results were roughly comparable to the European average, right? Well, you're not in Europe. You're coming to New Zealand thanks to the free speech, and you tell us why our lockups and mandates were wrong. And your example is, well, Sweden was about the same as the rest of Europe. We're not the rest of Europe. That's not what happened here. And Jack points out the death thing right now, in fact.
That's a lesson which a lot of people are determined not to learn, but it's a lesson which is really vital.
I mean, compare Sweden to New Zealand. Sweden has roughly twice the population of New Zealand, according to the WHO statistics at the moment, about 5 times as many COVID deaths.
That's quite possibly right. But
well, hang on. There's the hand wave. What? But you know what?
Get my horse.
But in Sweden, you could get your lattes and your haircuts. That's quite possibly right. So there's two kinds of people. So he's demonstrating right now he's not one of those kinds of people that cares about people dying. He cares about lattes and haircuts, right? So that's the camp he's in. Because just to say that's quite possibly right is hand waving it away. There's no other possibility there.
That's quite possibly right. But the effect is delayed. I mean, I don't pretend to be an expert on conditions in New Zealand.
Well done. Agreed.
On the whole, in Europe, travel bans achieved almost nothing. I can well believe that, given the geographical position of New Zealand, they might have achieved rather more there. But whatever they achieved can
Get
only
on a
ever be
plane.
temporary.
Fuck off.
Sooner or later, the country has got to open up, as it now has done, and it then gets the delayed effect that it avoided at an earlier stage.
If we were to face
Right. I want to have a look at that last statement as well. And I have actually scripted it down so we can have a look at what he just said. So here's the two quotes that I really want to knuckle down from this first part of the conversation. So the first thing he said, as I got written up here, was there's different. Now, I don't know whether he said roll or rule because of his accent, but either way, it doesn't really matter. Different role for people over 65 to people under 65. It's too difficult to enforce. Okay. So therefore, we can't stop people who are 12 driving cars. We can't stop people who are 60 getting the pension. What are you talking about? Tons of our laws are set up when we have a differentiation based on age. So of course you can have different rules based on a differentiation. Now I know COVID stuff wasn't about age, but that was the example he used. But we have tons of evidence for differentiating between people groups for enforcing laws. Age is a perfectly good example. Now, the second part of the conversation that we just played, this is what he said. At the start of it, he said, the effect is delayed. So what he's saying after Jack said, 5 times the deaths and 2 times the population, is he said the effect is delayed. Okay, so that says to me, he's saying it will happen. The effect, the deaths, are delayed. It will happen. In that last part of the conversation we played, he said this. You can only ever be temporary. The effects, can only ever be temporary. Sooner or later, the country has got to open up and it then gets the delayed effect it avoided earlier. So the delayed effect that he's comparing it to would be deaths. Because if he's saying the delayed effect with the example of Sweden, then that means the delayed effects, the deaths will catch up, which is quite plainly false. Because what happened in New Zealand with our lockdowns and our mandates and how we handled it was we gave the population time to get vaccinated. And so what has happened is the COVID cases have caught up to the rest of the world, but guess what hasn't caught up to the rest of the world? COVID deaths. That's why our COVID deaths are one of the best in the world. That's why there's reports that say the government that we had in then saved 20,000 lives. Because, the number of people catching COVID, the graph has gone up, and that's caught up to be comparable to the rest of the world. But the number of deaths hasn't followed that route. It stayed pretty much down here, and it stayed far, far less. And that's because New Zealand had the time, because of the lockdowns, because of the closed borders, to get everybody vaccinated. I'm not having that debate with anyone tonight. It is empirical data that the vaccination saved lives and the lockdown gave us time to get the population mostly vaccinated. So he's wrong. The delayed effect will be avoided because of the time we had to get vaccinated. So it's fake and false information, and I'm a smidge disappointed that that old mate Jack Tame didn't push back a bit harder on this, Joey.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I want to set fire to his feet like he did to pretty much every politician in the lead up to the election. Yeah, look, I think this guy who is literally a boomer is going, well, I don't agree with the lockdown in the UK, and therefore I don't agree with lockdowns in general. Like he's just transplanting the UK experience over to us. The UK was missing several advantages that we had. We have just generally a lot more faith that our government is not out to fuck us over.
Well, we did. That might have shifted in the last 18 months.
It may have shifted a bit, but I still, to this day, even like as much as I dislike National, I don't think that they are as militantly out to get the working class as the Tory government is over in the UK. There is massive swathes of their population that have no buy-in to their central government, that have no trust in it, that second guess everything that they say based on history. It's the thing that they've learned over decades. So when the government comes out and says, we have to lock down to save lives, people didn't go, yeah, okay, this sounds reasonable and they've explained it well. I'll do as I'm told. They automatically went, fuck you, government. No way. Something's up. And in the fullness of time, something was up. They were giving out contracts to their buddies. They were carving out, you know, all sorts of loopholes for business associates. They were partying while they were telling people not to go and visit their nan and stuff like that. Their lockdown has nothing on ours. It was compromised.
Yeah.
It was just degraded to a point where it didn't work, and it just ended up to the point where they were saying, oh, we had a lockdown and it didn't work. Well, we're saying we had a lockdown, we had greater buy-in from our population, and we all bit the bullet and did it, and it fucking worked. And what that's doing is showing up a mirror to these guys and going, you could have done this, you didn't, you fools.